You feel it in quiet moments, that uncomfortable sense that life is moving forward and somehow you're not. Others seem to hit milestones effortlessly while you're still trying to understand your own path. And the mind jumps to a painful conclusion. I'm late. But what if that feeling is not truth, only conditioning? We live surrounded by timelines that were never designed for our inner rhythm. Ages, milestones, expectations. They teach you when things should happen, and when they don't, you assume you missed your chance. Yet this belief quietly pulls you into a race that isn't yours, a life measured by someone else's clock. What if this delay isn't a problem to fix, but an illusion to see through? What if everything that feels off timing is actually guiding you away from the wrong timeline, and back to the one that truly belongs to you? Linear time is something your mind learned so it could survive, organize, and predict. It's a mental ruler, useful, practical, and deeply limited. Seconds, hours, years give structure to daily life, but they are not how reality itself actually moves. They are how the brain simplifies an experience that is far more fluid than clocks allow. Modern physics already hints at this. Time bends, stretches, and behaves differently, depending on speed, gravity, and observation. But you don't need equations to feel this truth. You've lived it. Think about moments of deep presence. A conversation that lasted minutes but felt like seconds. A painful phase that felt endless while you were inside it, yet now appears as a brief chapter when you look back. If time were truly linear and fixed, your inner experience wouldn't distort it so dramatically, yet it does constantly. That's because consciousness doesn't travel through time the way the calendar suggests. Your awareness moves through states. When your state shifts, your perception of time shifts with it. Waiting feels long when the mind resists the present. Flow feels timeless when attention is fully engaged. Nothing about the clock changed. Only your level of coherence did. The idea that you are late is born from confusing the map with the territory. Society teaches a sequence. Achieve this by that age. Reach this milestone by then. Keep pace or fall behind. These timelines are external narratives, not laws of reality. They are averages, projections, and expectations layered on top of human lives that are anything but uniform. Consciousness doesn't check these schedules before it evolves. When you say, "I should be further by now," what you're often measuring is not your inner readiness, but your position relative to someone else's visible results. You are comparing internal growth to external outcomes. That comparison collapses everything subtle that happened inside you. The lessons, the recalibrations, the emotional rewiring, the quiet decisions that changed your direction without producing immediate proof. From a quantum perspective, this makes sense. Reality is not a single line moving forward. It's a field of possibilities, many of them existing at once. What you experience as now is the result of where your attention, beliefs, and nervous system are tuned. Consciousness selects, it doesn't wait in line. When the inner conditions change, the experienced timeline changes with them. This is why forcing progress rarely works the way we expect. You can push action, speed, and effort, yet still feel stuck. Meanwhile, a small internal shift can suddenly collapse distance. Opportunities appear. Timing synchronizes. Things that felt blocked start moving without strain. From the outside, it looks like acceleration. From the inside, it feels like alignment. Linear thinking says, "I lost time." Conscious awareness asks a different question. What was being prepared? The pauses, the detours, the seasons where nothing seemed to advance were not empty. They were formative. Skills were integrating. Values were clarifying. Tolerance for uncertainty was being built. These are invisible upgrades. They don't show up on resumes or social feeds, but they determine which realities you can actually sustain. There's also a quieter truth most people miss. Consciousness cannot inhabit a timeline it is not ready for. You might intellectually want a future version of life, but if your internal state can't hold it, that version stays inaccessible. Not as punishment, as protection. Linear time makes this feel like delay. Awareness reveals it as calibration. If this sounds abstract, notice how your body responds when you imagine catching up versus when you imagine settling into now. One tightens, the other opens. The body understands before the mind does. Urgency fractures attention, presence gathers it, and gathered attention is what allows consciousness to interface with more coherent outcomes. This doesn't mean time doesn't matter at all, it means it's secondary. The primary variable is state. When state changes, time reorganizes around it. This is why two people can take the same number of years and arrive at entirely different realities, or why one decision made from clarity can outweigh a decade of unfocused effort. So when you feel behind, it's worth questioning the assumption itself. Behind according to which clock? Whose timeline are you measuring against? And more importantly, what if your consciousness has been moving with precision even when appearances suggested stagnation? As this idea settles, something subtle begins to loosen. The pressure to rush eases. The need to force outcomes softens. And in that space, another realization starts to surface. The sense of being behind may not come from time at all, but from comparison with stories that were never meant to define your rhythm. The feeling of being behind rarely comes from something true inside you. It usually arrives the moment you look outward and measure your life against a story that was never written for you. Not your pace, not your values, not your nervous system. It's subtle, almost invisible, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. From an early age, you were surrounded by timelines that didn't ask for your consent. Finish school by this age, build a career by that age, settle down, succeed, stabilize, optimize. These narratives were presented as neutral, even helpful, but they quietly taught you something dangerous. That progress has a single shape, and that shape is visible from the outside. So when your inner life didn't match what you saw reflected in others, the mind filled the gap with judgment. That's when the idea of being behind was born. What's rarely questioned is the source of that comparison. You are not comparing truth to truth. You are comparing your internal experience with all its doubts, fears, pauses, and unseen growth to a carefully edited external image. You're placing your raw process next to someone else's results and calling it evidence. But evidence of what exactly? Your inner truth doesn't speak in deadlines, it speaks in readiness. It moves through signals that are quiet and personal, a sense of alignment, a feeling of clarity, a moment when resistance drops. These signals don't translate well into social benchmarks, they can't be posted, they don't get applause, and because they are subtle, they are often ignored. The moment you adopt an external narrative as your measuring stick, your body reacts. You might feel a constant low-grade pressure, like something is chasing you, or a dull shame that appears for no clear reason, or a restless urge to do more, be more, hurry up. These sensations are not proof that you are failing. They are signs that you are trying to live inside a story that doesn't fit your internal rhythm. Comparison doesn't just distort perception, it fragments attention. Instead of being present with what is actually unfolding in your life, part of your awareness is always elsewhere. Watching, evaluating, calculating distance. That split drains energy. You feel tired not because you're inactive, but because you're carrying two timelines at once, the one you're living and the one you think you should be living. And here's the deeper layer most people miss. External narratives are usually built around outcomes, not states. They reward speed, visibility, and certainty. But your inner development often requires the opposite: slowness, ambiguity, time to integrate experiences that don't make sense yet. When you rush through these phases to keep up, you don't actually move forward. You just skip the part that would have made the next step sustainable. There's a quiet intelligence inside you that knows when something is premature. It shows up as hesitation, fatigue, or loss of motivation. But when comparison is loud, that intelligence is interpreted as weakness. So you override it, you push, you force movement, and later, you wonder why things feel hollow or unstable, even when you achieve what you thought you wanted. Notice how different it feels when an impulse comes from within. There's less noise, less explanation needed. You don't feel the need to justify your pace. You move because something is pulling you forward, not because something is chasing you from behind. That's inner truth in action. It doesn't announce itself dramatically, it feels calm, almost ordinary, but it has direction. The irony is that most people you compare yourself to are also comparing themselves to someone else. The narrative keeps moving, always just out of reach. This is how the sense of being behind becomes a collective illusion. Everyone is running, few are arriving, and almost no one stops long enough to ask whether the destination makes sense for them. When you step back from comparison, something interesting happens. Time feels less aggressive. Decisions become simpler. You start to notice that your life has its own sequencing. Certain things couldn't have happened earlier without breaking something inside you. Certain doors only make sense now, after what you've lived, processed, and released. This doesn't mean external examples are useless. They can inspire, inform, even guide. The shift happens when you stop treating them as deadlines and start treating them as possibilities. Not, I should be there by now, but this is one of many ways a life can unfold. As that shift takes place, another realization begins to form quietly in the background. If comparison created the illusion of being behind, then maybe alignment creates access to something else entirely. Not a faster version of the same timeline, but a different one. One where progress isn't measured by speed, but by resonance. And that opens a much bigger question. What if there is a version of your life where things are already working out, waiting not for more effort, but for the right internal signal to tune into it? There is a timeline where everything has already worked out, and hearing that doesn't require blind faith or grand beliefs. It requires a different way of understanding how reality organizes itself around consciousness. Not as a straight line you have to run on, but as a field you are constantly interacting with, whether you realize it or not. In physics, possibilities don't appear one after the other. They coexist. Multiple outcomes remain available until something selects one. In your life, that something is not luck and it's not effort alone. It's the combination of attention, belief, emotional state, and the meaning you assign to what is happening now. This is not abstract philosophy. You've experienced it in small ways. Think of moments when the right person appeared at the right time, or when a decision suddenly felt obvious after months of confusion. That wasn't time finally cooperating. That was alignment snapping into place. The version of your life where things work out is not in the future as a reward for suffering long enough. It exists as a potential pattern, a coherent arrangement of relationships, opportunities, and inner stability. What keeps you from experiencing it is rarely lack of effort. More often it's that your inner state is tuned to a different channel. When you live in constant worry about outcomes, your attention is fragmented. Part of you is here, but another part is projecting loss, failure, or urgency into imagined futures. That split matters. Consciousness tends to stabilize what it repeatedly rehearses, not as punishment, but as a form of efficiency. The system follows the dominant signal. This is why simply wanting a better timeline doesn't work. Wanting often carries tension. It implies absence. It subtly reinforces the idea that fulfillment is elsewhere, and that keeps your awareness oriented toward what's missing instead of what's available. The timeline where things work out doesn't feel dramatic from the inside. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It feels grounded. Decisions come with less internal debate. You stop forcing movement and start responding. There's a sense of being supported, even when challenges appear. Not because problems disappear, but because your relationship to them changes. One way to sense this is to notice how your body reacts to certain choices. Some options create mental excitement, but physical tightness. Others feel quieter, almost less impressive, yet bring a sense of relief or steadiness. That steadiness is a signal. It's your system recognizing coherence. The mind often overlooks it because it's addicted to intensity, but coherence is what sustains a life, not adrenaline. This also explains why copying someone else's success rarely leads to the same satisfaction. You might achieve similar results, yet feel strangely empty or exhausted. You accessed an outcome without accessing the timeline that made it meaningful. The external shape was there, but the internal alignment wasn't. The idea that everything has already worked out doesn't mean nothing needs to be done. It means action changes quality when it comes from alignment rather than fear. You still move, you still choose, but the movement feels responsive instead of desperate. You're not trying to outrun time, you're cooperating with it. There's a subtle shift that happens when you stop asking, how do I get there, and start asking, what state would I need to be in for this to be natural? That question redirects attention inward, where real leverage exists. It brings curiosity instead of pressure, and curiosity opens perception. Often, the timeline that works out requires you to let go of versions of yourself that were built for survival, not fulfillment. Old strategies, old identities, old ways of proving worth. This letting go can feel like loss at first. The mind labels it as delay or regression, but underneath something is reorganizing. You may notice periods where progress seems invisible, no clear results, no external confirmation. These phases are uncomfortable because they don't feed comparison, yet they are often where the deepest recalibration happens. Values align, priorities simplify. The noise quiets enough for a different signal to be felt. That signal doesn't pull you forward with force. It draws you in with resonance, and when you follow it, events start to line up in ways that feel almost obvious in hindsight. You think, of course it happened this way, but only because you're now standing in a timeline that makes sense from the inside. As this understanding settles, another pattern becomes visible. Anxiety about lost time, missed chances, and wrong turns doesn't just feel unpleasant. It actively tunes you away from coherence. The more you fight the idea that things should already be different, the harder it becomes to access the version of reality where they are working. And that leads naturally to a deeper question that begins to surface next. If anxiety pulls you away from the right timeline, what role does your emotional frequency play in shaping what you experience as possible? Anxiety about lost time has a very specific flavor. It's not just worry. It's a quiet tension that sits in the background of your thoughts and colors everything you do. Even moments that should feel good are interrupted by an invisible clock ticking somewhere inside you. You're present, but not fully. Part of your attention is always scanning the past, counting what you think you should have done differently. This kind of anxiety doesn't come from what's actually happening now. It comes from mental time travel. You replay choices, missed chances, wrong turns, and you imagine alternative versions of your life that feel more efficient, more impressive, more on schedule. The mind treats these imagined timelines as proof that something is wrong with the present one, and the body responds as if a real threat exists. When that happens, your system shifts into a state of urgency. Muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, thoughts speed up. This state might feel productive on the surface, but it carries a hidden cost. Urgency narrows perception. It reduces your ability to notice subtle signals, opportunities, and internal cues. You become focused on catching up instead of tuning in. Fulfillment, on the other hand, operates at a very different frequency. It doesn't arise from pressure. It emerges from coherence, from being internally aligned enough to recognize what fits and what doesn't. Anxiety about lost time pulls you away from that coherence because it constantly tells your nervous system that now is insufficient. And when now feels insufficient, nothing that grows from it feels safe. This is why people who are anxious about time often feel busy but unfulfilled. They are moving, sometimes constantly, but the movement is reactive. It's driven by fear of falling further behind rather than attraction to something meaningful. Actions taken from this state rarely land deeply. They don't integrate. They just add more motion. There's a subtle irony here. The more you worry about time slipping away, the less available you are for the moments that actually shape your future. Anxiety collapses attention inward in an unhelpful way. Instead of presence, you get rumination. Instead of clarity, you get noise. You might notice this in small decisions. When anxiety is high, everything feels urgent, so nothing feels clear. You second-guess yourself. You rush choices or delay them endlessly. You look for guarantees before moving, but guarantees don't exist in living systems. Fulfillment requires a tolerance for uncertainty, and anxiety about lost time erodes that tolerance. Another overlooked effect is how this anxiety distorts motivation. It convinces you that you need to push harder, even when your system is already overloaded. Rest starts to feel like a threat. Pauses feel irresponsible. Yet without pauses, there's no integration. Without integration, growth becomes brittle. Things might expand quickly, but they don't last. The frequency of fulfillment isn't about constant positivity or perfect calm. It's about a steady internal signal that says, I am here and this moment is workable. Anxiety about lost time sends the opposite signal. This moment is already a failure, and from that signal, very little of lasting value can emerge. What makes this especially tricky is that the anxiety often disguises itself as responsibility. It tells you you're being realistic, disciplined, aware. But listen closely to its tone. Is it supportive, or is it punishing? Does it invite wiser action, or does it demand faster movement at any cost? Fulfillment grows when your actions are rooted in enough safety that your system can explore, adapt, and learn. Anxiety collapses that sense of safety. It keeps you locked in survival mode, where the goal is not meaning but relief. And relief-seeking behaviors tend to repeat old patterns rather than open new paths. You can feel the difference in your body. When you imagine a future built from anxiety, there's often a sense of exhaustion even before anything happens. When you imagine a future approached from steadiness, there's room to breathe. That room matters. It's where intuition operates. It's where timing reveals itself. Anxiety about lost time also keeps you oriented toward outcomes instead of alignment. You focus on where you think you should be, not on whether your current direction makes sense. But fulfillment doesn't come from arriving quickly. It comes from arriving whole. As this awareness deepens, something begins to shift. You may start to notice that the moments when things fall into place are rarely the moments when you were rushing the hardest. They're often the moments when you stopped fighting the clock, even briefly. When you acted from a quieter place. This doesn't mean abandoning ambition or intention. It means recognizing that the quality of your inner state shapes the quality of the timeline you experience. And if anxiety pulls you away from fulfillment, then the real question becomes, what happens when you stop trying to outrun time and start aligning with it instead? You don't need to rush. That sentence can feel almost threatening when you first hear it, especially if you've lived for a long time, under the pressure of deadlines, expectations, and internal clocks that never seem to stop. Rushing has probably felt like the only responsible option, like if you slow down, everything will fall apart. But rushing is not the same as moving forward, and speed is not the same as alignment. When you rush, you are responding to fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of falling behind. Fear that if you don't push constantly, life will pass you by. This fear doesn't make you weak, it makes you human, but it does something important to your perception. It narrows it. It locks your attention onto short-term outcomes and strips away your sensitivity to timing, nuance, and fit. Alignment works differently. Alignment is not about doing less. It's about doing from the right internal state. When your frequency is aligned, action feels cleaner. You're not dragging yourself forward or forcing momentum. You're responding to signals, and those signals are subtle. They require presence to be noticed. Think about moments in your life when things unfolded smoothly, not necessarily easily, but smoothly. The right conversation happened, a decision became clear, an opportunity showed up without you chasing it relentlessly. In those moments, you probably weren't rushing. You were available. Your attention was here, not split between regret and anticipation. Rushing scrambles your frequency. It sends a message to your system that something is wrong right now. And when now feels wrong, your choices are shaped by escape rather than alignment. You choose what promises speed, not what offers coherence. Over time, this creates a life that looks busy but feels disconnected. The idea of the right timeline isn't mystical in a dramatic sense. It's practical. It's the sequence of events that matches who you actually are, not who you think you should be by now. That timeline responds to clarity, not urgency. It responds to consistency of state, not intensity of effort. Your frequency is shaped by what you repeatedly feel, think, and reinforce. When you live in rush, your baseline frequency is tension. Even moments of success are quickly replaced by the next pressure. There's no landing, no settling. Fulfillment can't stabilize there because the system never signals safety. Alignment begins when you stop treating time as an enemy, when you stop arguing with the present moment. This doesn't mean liking everything about it. It means recognizing that resistance to now drains more energy than the situation itself. And drained systems don't align well. They react. You might notice that when you slow internally, not externally but internally, your perception sharpens. You notice what actually matters. You sense when something is off, even if it looks good on paper. You also sense when something is right, even if it doesn't impress anyone else yet. That sensing is part of alignment. It's how you tune into a timeline that fits. Rushing often comes with the belief that you must control outcomes. Alignment accepts influence instead of control. You show up, you act, you adjust, you listen. This doesn't make life passive, it makes it responsive. And responsiveness is far more powerful than force in complex systems. There's also a deep relief that comes with alignment. Not relief because everything is solved, but relief because you're no longer fighting the rhythm of your own life. Your actions stop feeling like a race against invisible competitors. They start to feel like steps in a direction that makes sense from the inside. This relief is not laziness. It's efficiency at a deeper level. When your frequency is aligned, fewer actions create more impact. You stop wasting energy proving, rushing, and correcting. You conserve attention. And attention is what shapes experience. You may still face uncertainty. Alignment doesn't remove it, but your relationship with uncertainty changes. Instead of panicking, you stay curious. Instead of forcing clarity, you allow it to emerge. And often it does, not because you demanded it, but because you made space for it. As this way of moving becomes more familiar, something else becomes visible. Many of the moments you once labeled as delays start to look different. You see how they adjusted you, how they refined your sensitivity, how they prepared you to recognize opportunities you would have missed before. And that recognition opens the door to the next realization quietly forming underneath all of this. Maybe what you called delays were never mistakes at all, but precise preparations for something that could only arrive once you were aligned enough to receive it. Every delay you've lived through felt unnecessary while you were inside it. That's almost always the case. When something doesn't move, when answers don't arrive, when doors stay closed longer than expected, the mind interprets it as failure or punishment. But delays are rarely empty space. They are active periods of adjustment, even when nothing on the surface seems to be happening. Think back to moments when you felt stuck, not busy stuck, but suspended. Times when effort didn't produce results, when plans stalled, when life seemed to say, "not yet," without explanation. In those moments, you were still changing. Your nervous system was learning something. Your perception was being refined. Your tolerance for uncertainty was expanding. These are not minor upgrades. They determine what you can actually hold later. If certain things had arrived earlier, they would have overwhelmed you or locked you into versions of yourself that no longer fit. Timing isn't about deserving, it's about capacity, what you can receive, sustain, and respond to without losing yourself. Delays quietly build that capacity. The problem is that we are taught to value visible progress over invisible preparation. So when nothing external moves, we assume nothing internal is happening either. But internal change often requires stillness. Integration can't be rushed. Insight needs space. Identity needs time to loosen and reform. These processes don't announce themselves, and they don't follow calendars. You can often recognize this only in hindsight. You look back and realize that a version of you from 5 or 10 years ago could not have handled what you are capable of now. Not emotionally, not mentally, not relationally. What you once begged for would have broken something inside you back then. The delay wasn't a mistake, it was protection. Delays also strip away illusions. When movement slows, distractions lose power. You're forced to sit with questions you might otherwise avoid. Who am I without momentum? What do I actually want when no one is watching? What patterns keep repeating? These questions are uncomfortable, but they sharpen discernment, and discernment is essential for the next phase of any meaningful life. There's another layer that's easy to miss. Delays don't just prepare you for what's coming, they also filter out what isn't aligned. During long pauses, certain desires fade, certain ambitions lose their grip. You realize that some goals were borrowed, not chosen. If life had moved faster, you might have built something impressive that didn't belong to you. This is why delays often come with frustration mixed with confusion. You're not just waiting, you're being reorganized. Old motivations dissolve, new values take shape. The mind calls this lost time because it can't see the structure forming underneath. But structure is forming. Notice how often people say, "If only I had known then what I know now." That knowledge didn't appear randomly. It was earned through lived experience, through pauses, through mistakes, through waiting without clear answers. That knowledge is exactly what allows future opportunities to be recognized and handled differently. What's still coming to you isn't just an event or an outcome. It's a version of life that requires the person you are becoming, not the person you were. The delay ensures the match. Without it, you might reach the destination and feel completely disoriented, unprepared for the responsibility, complexity, or intimacy it requires. There's also a subtle emotional maturity that delays cultivate. Patience, yes, but more than that, discernment about effort. You learn when pushing helps and when it harms. You learn the difference between persistence and self-abandonment. These distinctions matter later, when stakes are higher and choices carry more weight. Delays change how you listen. You stop relying only on urgency and start noticing signals. What drains you? What steadies you? What keeps returning quietly? This listening isn't dramatic, but it's precise, and precision is what allows timing to feel right instead of forced. You may still wish certain things had happened sooner. That's human. But wishing doesn't negate the intelligence of what unfolded. The fact that you are here with the awareness you now have suggests that the sequence mattered. As this understanding deepens, delays stop feeling like dead zones and start looking like tuning periods, like adjustments made so that when movement resumes, it does so with less friction and more coherence. And once you see delays this way, another realization begins to take shape naturally. Maybe the ideal timeline isn't the fastest one at all, but the one that resonates so closely with who you've become that nothing feels out of place when it finally arrives. The ideal timeline is not accelerated, it is resonant. That distinction changes everything once you really feel it. Acceleration is about speed, resonance is about fit. One tries to get you somewhere faster. The other places you exactly where you can function fully, without tearing yourself apart in the process. When life is accelerated, things may happen quickly, but they often feel unstable. You're always catching your breath, always adjusting, always afraid that if you stop, everything will collapse. Acceleration demands constant effort just to maintain position. Resonance, by contrast, has a different texture. It feels steady, not effortless, but sustainable. You're moving, but you're not leaking energy everywhere. You can hear resonance in music. A note played at the right frequency doesn't fight the instrument. It fills the space naturally. A note played too fast or too forcefully might be loud, but it lacks harmony. Human lives work the same way. When your actions match your internal frequency, there's less friction. Things don't need to be forced to keep moving. The idea that faster is better comes from a world obsessed with output. But fulfillment doesn't care about speed. It cares about coherence. You can reach a milestone quickly and still feel deeply misaligned once you arrive. You can also arrive later and feel instantly at home. The difference isn't time, it's resonance. Resonance happens when who you are matches what you're doing and where you're going. Your values, your energy, your capacity, and your environment line up just enough for movement to feel natural. When that alignment exists, progress doesn't feel like pressure. It feels like continuation. Acceleration often ignores signals. It pushes past fatigue, intuition, and subtle resistance. Resonance listens. It notices when something drains you, even if it looks good. It notices when something scares you, but also feels strangely right. These signals don't shout, they hum, and only a system that isn't rushing can hear them. This is why the ideal timeline rarely looks impressive from the outside at first. It may appear slow, quiet, even uneventful, but inside, something is settling into place. Skills are integrating. Identity is stabilizing. Confidence becomes less performative and more grounded. When momentum builds from this place, it doesn't spike and crash. It compounds. Acceleration tends to be reactive. Something triggers urgency, and movement follows. Resonance is responsive. It emerges from clarity. You don't move because you're afraid of losing time. You move because the next step reveals itself naturally. There's less debate, less self-justification. You might recognize resonance by how little explanation you need. When something is aligned, you don't rehearse reasons endlessly. You simply know. Not with certainty about outcomes, but with trust in the direction. That trust quiets the noise that usually accompanies big decisions. Resonant timelines also have a different relationship with obstacles. Challenges don't feel like signs you're off track. They feel like part of the terrain. You engage with them instead of interpreting them. Acceleration, on the other hand, treats obstacles as delays, as enemies of progress. That creates tension where curiosity would be more useful. Another sign of resonance is timing that feels almost ordinary in the moment. Later, you look back and realize how precise it was. Certain meetings couldn't have happened earlier. Certain insights couldn't have arrived later. At the time, it just felt like the next natural step. That's resonance at work. This doesn't mean you never move quickly. Speed can exist within resonance. The difference is that the speed arises from alignment, not panic. When everything is tuned, movement can be swift without being chaotic, like a current carrying you, rather than a storm pushing you. The trap is thinking that slowing down means falling behind. In reality, slowing down internally often allows life to speed up externally in more coherent ways. You stop creating friction with yourself. You stop pulling in opposite directions. Energy consolidates. As you begin to sense this, the idea of an ideal timeline shifts. It's no longer about reaching a future as fast as possible. It's about staying in tune with yourself as things unfold. And when you stay in tune, outcomes have a way of arranging themselves with surprising precision. This understanding naturally leads to a deeper shift. When you stop trying to accelerate your life and start listening for resonance, you also stop fighting time itself. And in that surrender, a different kind of power begins to emerge, one that doesn't come from control, but from presence. When you stop fighting time, something unexpected happens. You don't become passive. You don't lose momentum. You don't disappear into waiting. What actually happens is that your energy stops leaking, and that reclaimed energy becomes your true power. Fighting time is exhausting because it's unwinnable. Time always moves. When you resist it, you're not slowing it down, you're just creating internal friction. That friction shows up as impatience, self-criticism, and a constant sense that life should already look different. You're moving forward, but with the brakes on. Part of you is pushing, another part is judging the pace. True power doesn't come from pushing harder against reality. It comes from working with it. When you stop arguing with where you are, your attention returns to the present moment. And attention is the most influential force you have. Wherever it rests, things begin to organize. Fighting time keeps your attention scattered. You're half in the past, replaying what should have happened. Half in the future, trying to control what hasn't arrived yet. Very little of you is actually here, and without presence, even the best opportunities pass unnoticed. When you stop fighting time, presence increases naturally. You start to see what's actually available instead of what's missing. You notice the small openings that urgency made invisible, a conversation, an insight, a shift in how you respond. These may seem minor, but they compound quickly when your system is no longer in resistance. Power isn't loud, it doesn't rush, it doesn't need to prove itself. Real power is responsiveness, the ability to meet what's happening with clarity instead of panic. That clarity allows you to act decisively, without wasting energy on doubt and second-guessing. When you fight time, every delay feels personal, like an accusation. When you stop fighting it, delays lose their emotional charge. They become information instead of obstacles. You begin to ask different questions, not, "Why isn't this happening yet?" but, "What is this moment asking of me now?" That shift alone changes how life responds to you. Not because the universe is rewarding surrender, but because your actions become more precise. You stop reacting to imagined threats and start responding to real conditions. Precision creates momentum without force. There's also a deep emotional shift that comes with no longer fighting time. Self-trust begins to rebuild. You stop treating yourself as someone who needs to be whipped into motion. You start listening instead. And when you listen, you discover that much of your exhaustion came from trying to become someone faster, louder, or more impressive than you actually are. True power feels grounded. You're not constantly checking the clock, comparing progress, or scanning for proof that you're on track. You move when movement makes sense. You pause when pausing adds clarity. This rhythm is not random, it's intelligent. When you stop fighting time, your relationship with effort changes. You still work, you still commit. But effort is no longer fueled by fear. It's fueled by intention. That difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Fear-based effort burns hot and fast. Intention-based effort burns steady. You might notice that your decisions become simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You stop overloading them with expectations. You choose what aligns now, trusting that the next step will reveal itself when needed. This trust isn't naive. It's learned through experience, once you see how often rushing distorted your judgment. Power also shows up as patience without passivity. You can wait without feeling weak. You can move without feeling desperate. This balance is rare, and it's where influence lives. People respond differently to you. Situations unfold with less resistance, not because you're controlling outcomes, but because you're no longer fighting the flow of events. Stopping the fight with time doesn't mean everything suddenly becomes clear. Uncertainty remains. The difference is that uncertainty no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a space of possibility instead of a countdown to failure. And from that space, creativity emerges. You begin to realize that many of the moments you thought you were losing time were actually moments where power was quietly being built. Resilience, discernment, emotional range. These qualities don't come from speed. They come from staying present through phases you didn't choose. As this way of moving becomes more natural, another awareness starts to surface. Presence itself becomes a turning point. Not something you reach later, but something that activates now. And it raises an important question that begins to form on its own. What if the moment you've been waiting for can only happen when you're fully here, not ahead, not behind, but right now? You are being prepared for a turning point, and preparation rarely feels the way we imagine it should. We expect signs, momentum, visible movement, but preparation often feels like stillness, repetition, or even confusion. It feels like life slowing you down when you're ready to speed up. And that's exactly why it's so easy to misread what's happening. A real turning point doesn't happen when everything is figured out. It happens when you are fully here, not ahead of yourself, rehearsing futures, not behind yourself, correcting the past, but present enough to respond to what is actually unfolding. Presence is not passive awareness, it's active readiness. Most people miss turning points not because they aren't worthy, but because they're not available. Their attention is divided. Their energy is stretched across timelines that don't exist. When something important tries to enter their life, it arrives quietly, and there's no space to receive it. Being present doesn't mean your life suddenly becomes calm or simple. It means you are no longer running from the moment you're in. You stop negotiating with reality. And that shift changes how powerfully you can move within it. Preparation often looks like repetition for a reason. Similar situations show up again and again, not to punish you but to refine your response. Each time something inside you adjusts. You react a little less, you see a little more, you pause before speaking, you choose differently. These small shifts are not dramatic, but they are cumulative. They are shaping the version of you who will meet what's coming. A turning point doesn't require more effort, it requires more presence. Effort without presence creates noise. Presence without effort creates clarity. When the two come together, movement becomes precise. You might notice that lately your tolerance for distraction has dropped. Things that used to excite you feel empty. Old motivations don't work anymore. This isn't a loss of drive, it's a recalibration. Your system is narrowing its focus, preparing to respond to something that requires you to be more whole, not more busy. Presence brings coherence. When you are present, your thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to line up. You stop contradicting yourself internally. That coherence is felt by others. Conversations deepen, opportunities take on a different tone. Even challenges start to feel more direct, less confusing. Turning points don't announce themselves as life-changing in the moment. They often feel ordinary. A conversation, a decision that feels simple but irreversible, a moment when you don't do what you used to do. You don't argue, you don't chase, you don't retreat. You respond from where you are now, not who you were before. That's why presence matters so much. Without it, the same moment passes unnoticed. With it, the same moment becomes a pivot. You are not being prepared through intensity, you are being prepared through awareness, through learning to stay with discomfort without escaping, through learning to listen instead of rushing to conclusions, through learning to trust what feels steady over what feels urgent. The now is not a waiting room, it's an active field. Everything that can happen next depends on how fully you inhabit this moment. Not perfectly, just honestly. When you're present, you can sense when something is opening instead of forcing it open. Presence also softens your grip on certainty. You stop demanding guarantees before moving. You accept that clarity often arrives after commitment, not before. That acceptance doesn't make you reckless. It makes you responsive. Many people think turning points come from bold action. Sometimes they do, but just as often, they come from restraint, from not reacting, from letting something unfold one step longer than you're comfortable with. Presence gives you the capacity to do that. You may feel like nothing big is happening right now, but preparation rarely feels big. It feels subtle, like learning how to stand still without collapsing, like learning how to move without forcing, like learning how to trust your timing without comparing it to anyone else's. The turning point you're being prepared for won't reward speed. It will require clarity. It will require that you recognize it when it arrives. And recognition only happens when you're here. As you stay present, you may start to sense that something is aligning beneath the surface. Not rushing toward you, not avoiding you, but waiting for the exact moment when your attention is no longer split, when you're no longer trying to get ahead of your life or catch up to it. That moment doesn't belong to the future. It belongs to now. And everything you've lived so far has been quietly guiding you toward being able to stay right here when it matters most. You are not behind. You are being calibrated. Every pause, every detour, every moment that felt confusing was adjusting you, not delaying you. Your life was not falling out of sync. It was finding the frequency that truly fits who you are becoming. And maybe this is the moment where something quietly clicks. Not because everything is solved, but because you finally see yourself differently. Less rushed, less judged, more present. Your timeline doesn't need to look like anyone else's to be right. It only needs to feel true when you're inside it. When you stop fighting time, comparing paths, and doubting your rhythm, you give yourself access to a life that flows instead of resists. And that shift doesn't happen later, it happens now. If you stayed with this message until the end, write this sentence in the comments so I know you were here with me. I trust my timing. And if this resonated with you and you want to go deeper, choose one of the videos appearing on the screen now and keep going. There's more waiting for you on this path.